Morning, everybody, and welcome to your shot of leadership inspiration from Alembic Strategy. In this Strategy Cafe, we're going to be talking to Victor Olisa, who has had a fascinating career as Borough Commander, and then prior to that as a police officer in various different parts of the police force, and is currently in an amazing role, really interesting role, in his retirement around reducing violence. So we're going to have a chance to talk about some of the real highlights of his career and the leadership challenges he faced then. And then towards the back of the webinar, we'll be just chatting about his current role in influencing reductions in street crime of one sort or another. So fascinating discussion ahead. Welcome to the session today. I hope you really enjoy it. If you like it, you'll find the podcast version of this on iTunes. It's also on SoundCloud, and if you look for Alembic Strategy and Strategy Cafe on YouTube, you can also see past recorded versions of these. There's loads on there, and there's a really interesting collection of speakers that we've had over the years, really wide-ranging leadership in all sorts of different roles, from public and private sector and politics, etc. So very interesting, and it's worthwhile digging in. But let's get going with today's webinar. So good morning, Victor. Thank you very much for being online. Tell us just a little bit about you.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this. Yeah, so I served 35 years as a police officer. I joined Surrey Police back in '82, straight from university. In actual fact, the first black person to join Surrey Police, which was interesting in many ways, and hopefully we get to talk about some of the reasons why. I served in Surrey for about 8 years and then moved to the City of London Police, and essentially for a different policing experience and a different policing challenge, because the city specialised in fraud investigation, which very few other forces did. Whilst in the city, I spent 3 years in the Home Office, working on policy for stop and search with police forces across the country, advising ministers and looking at ways of actually improving stop and search so it didn't create the type of anxiety that it tends to do too often with different communities. From the Home Office, I moved to the Metropolitan Police on promotion in 2005 as a superintendent. I worked in Southwark, which was a fantastic place to work. I worked in the stop and search team, led the stop and search for a couple of years, did some policy work, working directly to a couple of commissioners. And then I got promoted in 2011. I had 2 Borough Commander postings, first in Bexley and then in Haringey a year after the riots in 2011. After Haringey, I headed the diversity unit for the Met for about 18 months and retired in 2017. And since retirement, I've worked with civil society in Sweden, worked with police officers from Sao Paulo who've come over to the UK. I've visited Chicago to look at their violence reduction program. And I'm doing a number of charity work. So retirement has been quite busy.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. I'm glad. It sounds like we need you. So amazing. So what an incredible career. So maybe just give us a few minutes just on your background. So, you know, starting out, I think when we were chatting, you told us you ended up on the picket lines with Arthur. So tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, it was 82. It was a great time to join the police service because he was going through a number of changes, and some of the things that the police was trying to do then, I think they're still trying to do now, is actually just for them improve their reputation. And they were doing a number of initiatives such as recruiting graduates and recruiting people from Black and Asian background. And I found policing really exciting after studying biochemistry. I thought it's something I'd like to do. But 82, you just had the riots in 81 around the country, you know, Brixton, St. Paul, Manchester. So there was a bit of a tension in the air between police services and certain communities. And it was going through that transition, and I joined. And I guess I found it really exciting and really surprising. And some of the things that surprised me about policing was the repetitive and routine nature of the things you did on a day-to-day basis. You know, when you look through the adverts, you expected lots of excitement. You know, in police cars, chasing villains and everything else. But the reality was slightly different. It's a lot more complex than that, and it's a lot more routine. So that surprised me. And the things that excited me was 82, the riots had just, the miners' strike had just started. And as a probationer, I never expected to get involved in it because I wasn't public order trained. But the whole process took longer than it ought to have done. So forces decided to send probationary officers, and I went to the miners' strike for about a year. And it was just an incredible experience. And as you can see from the photographs there, it was a really grueling process, both in terms of policing, but also in terms of compassion, because, we were going to these pits. There were, miners who were looking at saving their jobs. They were really struggling. They were looking to the future in terms of how they're going to be able to actually cope and, provide for their families. And we were stuck in the middle, really. We were trying to maintain order, but we're seen as almost as an invading army in certain cases, doing the work of the government with which, the miners were against. So we were stuck in a difficult place. And for me personally, there were very few black officers in the police service at the time, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. And I was, attracted to some of the anger that some of the miners felt, because not only can you vent your anger at a police officer, but you can vent it at someone who looks different from the vast majority. So it was a focal point, but it was a massive learning experience, and it helped me build resilience and the ability to stay calm and cope with situations that were difficult.
Did you suffer being targeted? I'm guessing you got quite a lot of abuse, but did you suffer? And what did you do? How did you build your resilience?
Well, I mean, there was verbal shouting and everything else from the miners, you'd expect. I mean, they were screaming at the police because they were angry at the police, and I was there and I looked different, so occasionally they tagged it at me. But it's just remembering that it wasn't anything personal. They didn't know me as Victor Olisa. I was a police officer in a uniform, and they were angry at what was happening to them and what they saw as the police continuing to try and do something to them that they didn't like. Excuse me for a minute. So I guess the way of coping is actually just understanding that it wasn't personal, and you had a job to do, and you just remained professional. And I had friends who,
yes,
at the end of a grueling day, you all got together, you relaxed, had a few beers, and talked about the things that you went through. So again, that was hugely important, having colleagues to talk to afterwards.
Yeah, actually having great team spirit around you was really helpful. I think that came across. We've had talked to others about being in the thick of things, like for example in the rugby environment, and similar thing comes across that when you had a tough day, actually the team around you is really important.
Yeah, they're invaluable, because you've got to have that certain level of trust with them, but it gives you a group of people that you can bounce your uncertainties off. So did I react in the right way? Was that particularly bad? And they put your arms around you metaphorically, and you just realize next day you recharge, you get in there and you deal with it, knowing that there are people around you who will support you if something went wrong.
I think I can hear your dog in the background. Have you got somebody else on the interview this morning?
Yeah, I think he wants to get involved.
He should come on. Is it he or a she?
Is a he. I think it would come out to be pandemonium.
Yeah, no, lovely. So tell us about fraud. Fraud is a big step change, and this is like in the old days before the internet, right? So, or maybe just the start of that. But tell us about being involved in fraud in the city.
It was very different. I mean, the city specialised in investigating high-value, complex fraud of an international nature. There's very few other forces that do that. I mean, I dealt with some fraud investigation in my time in Surrey Police, but you're looking at fairly low value, relatively local offences. So moving to the city was a great experience, and I moved there predominantly to get some fraud experience, to investigate fraud, and actually do some of those things that you think about when you want to join the police. Pitting your wits against intelligent, sophisticated criminals, which are you and far between, to be honest with you, in day-to-day policing.
Yeah.
And it just struck me as something to do next after working in Surrey for 8 years. And I was fortuitous, actually, because I moved in 1990, fortuitous in a professional sense. I transferred to the city in 1990. Fraud investigation was a specialist area for the City of London. In 1991, there was the first of 2 large IRA bombs in the city, St Mary Axe, sadly, which a number of people were killed. But that and a second bomb a year and a half later in Bishopsgate propelled the city into looking into how they dealt with security and actually kept the square mile safe. And through that, the City of London developed, expertise in security in addition to fraud investigation. And I was fortuitous to be able to get involved in actually some of the policy work and operational work, which led to creating measures of actually recording, offenders who came into the city. So if we go back to the time of the Irish terrorism conflict, you had people who brought in large improvised devices, left it somewhere and disappeared. They did not want to be recognized. And the challenge was, how do you capture those images so you can then carry out investigations to try and find those people, which is very different from today. So developing that technology was great. But going back to fraud, I was fortunate to lead a fraud investigation team of some really experienced officers. And the modus operandi of these large fraud offences was fairly straightforward. Someone will come along with a fictitious document claiming they owned a large quantity of valuable reserves, and they want to deposit with a bank and have a receipt which the bank will give and say they've deposited a financial instrument, and they will then try and use that to defraud a large company or a wealthy individual. The real challenge was tracing the money, tracing the money very quickly, because I say these things are international, and trying to get hold of it and stop it before it disappeared into an account where you couldn't get hold of it. And that was incredibly exciting, because you're working with different criminal investigation agencies around the world. You're working with accountants in large companies, and you're building a lot of trust with these companies to actually give you access to some of their banking systems so you can actually prevent the money disappearing around the world. That was amazing.
Interesting. It sounds like a really good intellectual challenge, and pitting yourself against this kind of activity, and then also working across different bits the technical community needed. Maybe a good kind of grounding for what happened later. So I remember the bombs. I was we were young and living in the south of the city at the time, and coming in during both of those. And then I remember when the Tottenham riots happened, we were, I think, away on holiday when this went up, and it spread around everywhere. So the background to this is to do with Mark Duggan, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The shooting of Mark Duggan following a police surveillance operation, and I think, this is well-written documentation about the riots and different explanations of the causes of it. But I think part of the reason why the shooting of Mark led to the riots was, you've got certain sites in London which have been troublesome in terms of police community relations in the past. So you got Tottenham, you got Brixton, and then you got places around the country which have similar historical experiences. So Moss Side in Manchester, St Paul's in Bristol, Toxteth in Liverpool. So when Mark was shot in Tottenham, and if it had happened in any one of these, historically problematic sites, the tensions are always greater. But I guess the thing was, it wasn't the shooting itself that led to the riots. A couple of days between the shooting and the riot starting on the Saturday, there were a number of incidents which led to misunderstanding between police and the Independent Police Complaints Commission, police and Mark's family, and the dialogue which just like I say, those misunderstandings led to the point that people got frustrated, they lost trust in the police, and they just felt they didn't have any control in terms of what was going on to try and get an understanding. And on that Saturday evening, the first person decided they were going to throw a brick at a police car, others joined, and the rest is history, as we know about. So
Crowd
had we
effect.
been able to deal with those misunderstandings, maybe we would not have got to the position when we had the riots.
So then it became your gig to pick up the community after that, and from just learning a little bit about this, in the end, there was investigation, a case taken against the police, but it was found ultimately to be a lawful shooting. But there were lots of question marks, I think. But during that, I think there was a worry, wasn't there, that during that whole phase that it would all kick off again at the point of the end of the case. But you then took over, and so this is the thing I'm really interested in: is that, how did you think about getting your force into the community, and what were your key leadership points to prevent a recurrence as things went through?
Yeah, I mean, I need to start by saying I thought it was a great privilege to be given the opportunity to lead that part of London after such a difficult time and a challenging time. And I'd been at Bexley at the time of the riots. I was there as the borough commander, and I was expecting to be there for 3 years. And I guess I must have led the people in Bexley in a way that gave the senior officers, senior managers trust that I could not only lead the people in Haringey professionally to carry out policing, but also had the ability to rebuild the bridge between the police and the community, and get to some point of rebuilding the trust. So it was like I say, it was a privilege, but it was hugely challenging because I walked in there realizing that the family were really angry, as you would expect. Sections of the community were really, really angry because they felt this was just another example of the police behaving without accountability. So it wasn't only just rebuilding the bridge between the police and sections of the community, rebuilding trust in the professionalism and fairness of the police, but also doing the stuff that everyday folks wanted us to do: prevent crime, reduce crime, and keep them safe. So I felt very early on that the things that were our strength was to do policing in a fair way that people recognize. So whether it's your bike that was stolen, or your house that was broken into, or you're a victim of an assault, we were going to be there. We were going to investigate it thoroughly without fear or favor. And that was a strength that we brought, and that was my strategy. And that required me convincing my officers that that was our forte, but also recognizing those are the things, when not done particularly well in the past, they've created the tension between the police and certain sections of the community. I talked about search, people complaining that the police carry out unfairly.
So they got a concept of what they got a really strong concept of what you're there for, and I guess trust is built in explaining what you can do and then doing it, right? So it's I guess it's very basic, but quite difficult to get that out across the whole community.
Absolutely, and to get that out consistently. So the type of thing that I did to try and explain as simply as I could at the time, the measure of performance of the boroughs and the Met in general was a basket of indicators. So you had things like reduction of burglary and detection of burglary, reduction of robbery, detection of robbery, motor vehicle theft, confidence and satisfaction. So you got measured across these 10 activities. And my strategy was, we will actually have a conversation at all levels, from my level with the chief exec and the leader and the local MPs, where I would explain to them where we were in relation to other boroughs, how we're doing in terms of detection and reduction. Really difficult conversations at times, particularly in areas when you weren't doing well. But the intention was, for example, we're not doing well in terms of theft of motor vehicle, but these are our plans to improve it. But we're doing particularly well in the reduction and detection of robbery and burglary. So it required a lot of trust. It required a lot of openness and a bit of exposure. So I
Yes.
did that at my level, but I also insisted that my sergeants who were working at the ward levels, so having ward meetings, had those conversations, but made it specific to their wards. And in that sense, what I was trying to do is to say to them and the public, this is what we're here to do. If we talk about policing and how we're contributing to policing and making people safe, then we earn the right to do all the other things like community engagement, working in schools, going to fates, because we're doing the things that people want us to do. And if we weren't doing that, then we don't deserve and we won't earn the right to do all these other things like community engagement, going in schools, because those things can be done at other organisations. Sounds very straightforward, but it required a great deal of trust, and it required persistence to say we will continue with the same message, good and bad, but talk about how we're going to improve for the things we're not doing so well.
I think some of the simplest things on paper in leadership are the hardest to achieve, especially across a big group where you're trying to achieve openness and you're trying to connect with people rather than see it as a sort of an analytical situation. You realize it's about people and it's about building openness. And that requires good, consistent building of relationships and people trusting that you're telling them the truth and that you'll follow up. So I think this kind of point about getting the basics right comes through from lots of our interviews with leaders, and people really struggle with it because you need to coordinate across a big team and everyone needs to be getting the basics right as a team, and that's the hard bit.
Yes.
And as you say, it's like a repeat, it has to build up in people's minds as a trustworthy connection. I thought it was really interesting. You then talked about getting your senior people out into the community meetings in all sorts of different forums. So to create this sense of trust by just communicating and telling people what you were doing and where you were at, which I think then opened up the channel so you could start to police with the community and get intelligence flowing back into your team. I think that's right.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and two things in that sense. Yeah. So one of the things that I was really strong about was that officers in schools, and not necessarily to get intelligence, but to create a consistency and create that trust and create that conduit back to the wider organisation, the borough, but also give young people the sense that that one officer has got access to provide other officers when things weren't particularly working. So go back to the policing thing, but I also go back to the trust building and the consistency. And the other thing is, as you were saying, because you have to keep repeating it, you have to be consistent. Everybody has to be saying very similar things. So it wasn't much point in me talking about the performance measure if I had officers working at ward panels who are going to be talking about, summer fates and the rest of it. We had to be consistent in terms of, as an organisation, this is what we're here to do. This is what we have to offer. This is how well we're doing it. And this is where we need you to work with us to help us to actually improve. And it almost turned it from being an agency of enforcement to an agency of service.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what we are, and which is exactly when the first commissioners for the Metropolitan Police laid down the turn principles, one of which was saying, the police officer is a member of the community doing something they expect communities to do, but he or she gets paid for. So we're a public servant to do those things that the public don't have the time to do, but give us the trust to be able to deal with it. And if we can't do that, then it makes it very, very difficult to be able to actually build that trust, build that confidence in people, and actually encourage them to take responsibility where things are difficult. And I guess, in a way, the greatest success in Haringey is when the inquest verdict came in, and which was totally unexpected, I have to say, because we were hoping for a neutral verdict, prepared for an unlawful killing. But I think the lawful killing, professionally and from a personal point of view, was the right decision. But it created a massive amount of tension that we would not have been able to deal with alone without being really forceful. And I think when that verdict came out, the work they've been doing over the last 18 months, then you had influential members of the community who stepped in, took responsibility, and works on behalf and with the police. And I think a real graphic example of that is if people get a chance to watch the BBC documentary on the Met Police, the very first episode of the first series, really illustrates that graphically, when you had all the supporters, the crowd, and some agitators from outside Haringey, outside the police station, and they were just so angry that they were prepared to start another public disturbance. And sections of the community, individuals, took control, convinced, you know, those people who were really angry that that wasn't the way to go, was not to actually start another public disturbance. And it was hugely helpful, hugely helpful.
It's an amazing outcome. It's an amazing outcome and a real vindication. This morning, everyone, I'm interviewing Dr. Victor Olisa about his career in policing. We've just been chatting about, you know, how he worked with the Haringey police to engage with the community and build trust and overcome the tensions around Mark Duggan shooting. Really interesting stuff. I want to spend a little bit of time just hearing about what you're just, you know, coming up to the hour, so we've only got a couple of minutes, and I want to take some questions as well. So people, if you're listening in and you want to ask some questions, there's an area on your GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to put some questions in and we'll ask them just as we get up to 9 o'clock, if you can stay on for a few minutes. But just keen just to hear about where you're at now. So maybe we've got just a couple of minutes on this, Victor, so we've got time for questions.
Of course. Yeah, so one of the things that's really challenged me, and I'm working with a number of people to try and work on solutions on, is the rise in knife crime. So when I was in Southwark back 12 years ago, very similar experience in the high level of youth violence, killing, injuries, and everything else. And it's just really disappointing that a decade later, you know, we're going through the same process and going through the same angst. And some of the work that I've been doing just recently is working with organizations around the world and organizations locally to look at some of the models for reducing knife violence. And you know, one of the methods talks about regularly is the public health model. So yes. I've been to Chicago and spoken to the team out there in terms of what they're doing, seeing the work that they're doing, which looks really encouraging. Speaking to colleagues up in Merseyside, academics, and actually looking at how we can possibly implement some of the models up there. Speaking to governmental officials in London and doing similar things. And I just think that looking at the results that other agencies, other organisations around the world and in other parts of the UK have achieved, I think there's a real opportunity to get some level of control of the level of violence, reduce that, and then do the greater work in actually changing community perception, changing environment, and actually having a better understanding of the causes. But my view is that we've got to grab hold of the situation first and foremost, have some level of control, and then really then focus on all the community capacity building and looking at the causes of some of this violence. And that's been hugely interesting. Still in the field of policing, but it's much broader and actually working with a wider range of agencies to look for longer term solutions to this really difficult problem.
Really pleased to hear about it. Really pleased to hear, the range and extent of things that you're involved with to help with that. It's a very current, challenging issue. I've got some questions, and folks, if you want to ask Victor some questions, we'll just take a moment after the hour just to do that. But just wrapping up this part of the section up to 9 o'clock, I just wanted to say thank you very much for participating in Strategy Cafe and sharing your leadership experiences. Just absolutely brilliant. So the recording of this will be up online shortly on our podcast and on the YouTube site. So go and subscribe and you can watch it there. We'll send out a link to the video and you can download it on your podcast in SoundCloud or on iTunes and listen to the audio track. But thank you very much. And also thank you. I had a couple of comments coming in about thanks to your dog who participated fully in the interview today, which I thought was really wonderful. Just really wanting to get in on the action. It was great. So you better give him a special thanks from everybody as well, whatever that is, some sort of doggy treat. Just a few little forthcoming attractions. If you like today's webinar, next time round we've got Richard Burge, who has recently taken over as a chief executive of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we'll be talking about post-Brexit London and business. And then coming up, Henry Rose Lee, who's an award-winning speaker, entrepreneur and author, and just really inspiring person to listen to, great TED talker. So some fantastic speakers coming up, really exciting. And then don't forget, you can still come along and register. The next Leaders Forum is on the 26th of February. We're going to be doing some work around mediating conflict, together with probably one of the world's leading conflict resolvers, Suzanne Kingston. She's a leading light in family conflict resolution, starting out in divorce, but moving into mediation and arbitration, and really setting the light for that around the world. So super person to work with, and she's going to be bringing us her key insights for resolving conflict in business, and we'll do some workshopping around that. So should be a really valuable session. So come along. Free for clients, there's a charge for non-clients. It's a half-day session, but should be fantastic. And then we'll be seeing Victor again, I'm delighted to say, at Meaningful Human Leadership this year. So this is our summer conference, which is coming up on the 18th of June. Great and cracking environment in Urban Golf in Smithfield Street in Farringdon. And Victor will be on the panel, and we're talking about difference. So diversity, but taken right down to the level of understanding how we react to difference and why difference is valuable, and how to get strength out of our differences in a business context, and drive extra productivity, extra performance by understanding how we react and getting the best out of the differences that we experience, even inside of ourselves. So that's coming up. So come and register and come along to the conference, and it should be an amazing day like last year. So thank you very much. I've got a question for you, if you're okay, just to stay on for a second.
Of course.
There's a note that Streatham Police Station was closed by Boris when he was mayor, and an area of over 50,000 people. I don't know if that's right, but the comments come in. Just wondering what you feel about police cuts like that, when we're still dealing with sort of fairly major incidents in central London, in the central area and around, and also the terror attacks. Just it must be very tough in police right now.
It is, and it has been for the last 10 years. And part of the austerity measures was reduction in budgets to the police, and we had to make a decision of actually where we're going to actually reduce the funding. And the last commissioner was very clear that he wasn't prepared to cut police numbers. Yeah. So we had to find those savings from other means, and part of that saving came from actually selling off police buildings and shutting down police buildings. I'll have to say that money didn't come back to the police, it went to the mayor's office. So those are difficult decisions that we had to make. And unfortunately, some of the consequences of those decisions are being seen now. There's no indication that had the police station been open, then those attacks wouldn't have happened. But clearly, there'd have been police officers there, providing greater reassurance. There'd be sanctuary for people who felt at risk or frightened. Having said all that, in this particular situation, the offender was under surveillance, so thankfully the officers could react very, very quickly before he hurt any more people and perhaps kill somebody else. But it still doesn't take away that our police buildings around London, and I'll speak for London, not the rest of the country, we do need them back. We do, not necessarily all of them, but we did need those visible representation of comfort, order, which police buildings bring, because you've got police officers in them who can actually help communities very quickly.
It's totemic, isn't it? And it's symbolic. And I think there's a real power in identity in all sorts of different ways. So the uniform is powerful, but also the building is powerful, and it's a sign and a reminder. So I think it has an effect on people's minds when they see these things. So I think that's right.
Yeah, I agree, and they're hugely practical. And I know some of the conversation is, we do all these surveys about how often people go into police buildings, and as a result, not many people go into it. So that provides justifications for shutting them down. What is difficult to measure is the level of confidence that it gives to people. Know that there's a building there, and you're saying it's iconic, it's totemic, and that reassurance you just cannot measure. And because of that, sometimes it's easy to make a decision that, to get rid of these buildings will save money. And I guess one practical consequence of the, shut down the police buildings at the moment, and rightly so, the Prime Minister has actually pledged to increase police numbers by 20,000 in London.
Mm-hmm.
You have to house those officers somewhere. We
Mm-hmm.
have to provide lockers for them to actually store in their equipment. We have to provide buildings for them to work from. That is the most significant practical problem that we're facing at the moment, because there are not enough police buildings to provide accommodation for these officers. So are we going to end up in a position where we're buying more buildings to create police stations?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It really doesn't make any sense in the long term. You end up just spending more money in the long term, unless you're changing for a more efficient environment. I guess another question following on from that is, we hear that the current government, Boris again, is sort of taking more of a direct interest in this. And maybe you can't talk about this, and I don't want to put you under pressure that you can't speak to something, but I guess there's a curiosity out there about that commitment to see a change at street level.
I think the commitment is genuine, but I think the reality is there's a time lag between recruiting new personnel, training them, having them ready and competent to be on the street to make that difference in terms of the number, presence, accessibility to the police service. So, the way the announcements are made is almost feels like, I'll snap my fingers and in a week's time you'll have an additional 5,000 police officers on our street.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. And I guess what we all hope for is that pledge will continue regardless of any additional activities, distractions that might take place that might force politicians to take their eye off the commitment that they've made to recruit more officers.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up. I'm really super grateful for you coming on Strategy Cafe this morning. I really enjoyed it, and thank you very much indeed for your time, and really look forward to speaking to you again, and look forward to being with you at the Meaningful Human Leadership Conference. But that's it for today, so thank you very much. Thank you everybody for listening. If you enjoyed it today, please tell other people and get them to subscribe. We've got some great sessions coming up, and it'd be great just to get them out there and have people listening into these wonderful leadership insights from such great people. Thank you very much, Victor, and thanks to your dog, and see you later. Have a lovely day.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you for your time. Really great.
Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
Bye.